So let's throw something else in the mix now. I don't know how we're going to chop this up on a podcast, but we'll see. And that is this idea, again, two things in combination. I mentioned at the top this idea of a conditioned self. So let's just chat about what I mean. Um, there is an argument that we, prior to birth, in some peculiar way, are perfect. When we're in the womb, if you're a person of faith, you say we have a soul. But even if you aren't a person of faith, you would say, well, we have a bodily structure, we have a mind, and we have instinct. And when, at the moment of our birth, we're whole. It's not like we have to learn anything. There's no expectation of us to complete ourselves. We're the full enchilada. And then we're born. And then the shit hits the fan immediately, because there are all sorts of traumas that are visited upon us, and it doesn't stop. And the biggest trauma is time. We've only got a limited amount of it. We're lucky if we've got 70 odd years. And whether we're consciously aware of that or not, I don't think really matters. On an instinctive level, we know that there's a bit of a hurry on to find meaning. And so I think what often happens is that by the time we hit our teens, we have already been, if you like, not necessarily corrupted, but we have been traumatized by a sense of loss. Part of what's happened is that our innocence, our sense of perfection that we might be able to hang on to for a few years in a good family environment is challenged inevitably by peer pressure, and cultural pressure, and parental mistakes, and a perception of neglect and so on. And before you know it, you do hit your late teens, and the sort of things that you've just been referring to, this sort of victim mentality, can become very entrenched. So my little list, if I look at what we might describe as conditioned self, includes these things. A sense of entitlement, which we're obsessed by at the moment, particularly when we talk about millennials. We seem to think that there is a sort of endemic sense of entitlement. I don't think that's necessarily true. I think everybody can suffer from it. That's the first thing. A need for approval is the second thing. Number three, battling insecurity. And I would put in brackets the notion that I am not worthy of love. To me, this is actually almost a universal issue, and you don't tend to get rid of it until you die. Fourth, a codependent attitude to life. We'll come back to that in a little bit of detail. And finally, this is a whopper, the need for control. So those five things, I would argue, are a pretty good encapsulation of what we might call the conditioned self. And to my mind, this process of attempting to mature, to become a grown-up, I don't think it, by the way, it's a destination. I think it is a journey. I don't think that probably you're lucky if you're going to meet 3 proper grown-ups in your entire life, and I don't think I'm one of them. That it's a process, a day-by-day, little bit of a battle sometimes to fight the slide back to being a conditioned person, a weaker version of your best self. So we've talked a little bit about the sense of entitlement, which I think is very much a kissing cousin to a sort of victim mentality. The need for approval is something that I think is perhaps a little more buried in your generation than it was in previous ones. When you talk about the confidence that a lot of your peers have, somehow they have pushed to a further corner of that subconscious, that they're absolutely petrified, that they're not, that they don't have status. Yeah. But actually it's still there. This idea of I'm not worthy of love, I think, is one of the key components to our infantile ego. And now let's just talk about the way in which codependency and this idea of not being worthy can be intertwined. So I've got 3 kids. The eldest is a little bit younger than you. But I'm very much aware, on paper anyway, that my job is to try and help these 3 people grow up to be independent people. They're not supposed to live like me. They're not necessarily supposed to have the same value system as me. What they are supposed to do is I can try and put them in, keep them in an environment or create an environment within which they will learn to learn. They don't have to learn what I know. They need to have a hunger for for knowledge, not least self-knowledge. And this is the work that I do, is trying to think of the tools in which they can do that. Now, so let's talk about parental-child relationships in the context of what I'm just talking about. And you've talked a little bit about the relationship that you have with your parents, which sounds very healthy, actually, because it sounds like you've got a nice balance between respect in the sense that you respect the love that they have shown you and that you have an implicit trust that they care for your emotional well-being. And it strikes me that they probably have the same trust in you from what you've said, the little that we've discussed about this. The fact that you can let it all hang out and tell each other anything, I think is probably a pretty healthy sign. However, there is a however. And this is where we look at what we might call codependency. And this is where I think there are no rules. And this is where it is a process, not a destination. And I would argue that in the decade between about 15 and 25, there's a difficult dance that goes on. If you have, as it seems you are privileged to have, pretty good parents who are getting it right maybe 50, 60% of the time, then there is a very good chance that they will have provided an environment through which you can grow into a strong version of yourself. And yet, I wonder whether one of the risks of this is codependency. So when you talked about, moving to Chicago and the potential for feeling unnerved because you're moving away from home and so on, it strikes me that you were in pretty good shape, other people around you weren't. But if we're looking at the grand shape of life, I think it's very important, and it really pisses parents off, but there's a certain point where a young person needs to shift the focus of their mentor system, in other words, the mentors for themselves, away from their parents. And they should be looking to seek their own mentors outside of a familial structure. Now, I may be wrong, but I think the reason why I suggest that this is important is to allow us to escape the shadow of their influence. And I meet so many middle-aged people, and I'm probably one of them myself to some extent, where the influence of that parental influence has not been sufficiently diluted earlier in their life for them to come to the strongest version of themselves. It's been an obstacle to growth that they have had such a high degree of, and I don't think it's respect necessarily, a high degree of observation of what their parents may or may not be thinking about what they are up to in that particular moment in time. What do you think? Am I heading off in completely the wrong direction, or is there some validity in what I'm saying?
No, and I do agree on that, and I think definitely you definitely need. I get what you're saying. Like you definitely need. It's nice to be close with your parents, but you also need to kind of build your own values and cores that can be separated.
Those um, inspirations, those educators in the broadest sense, in your own peer group, and I think you're going to struggle to find it very often in your college
Yeah.
professors. Where does one find them?
I mean, I know just as a teenager and stuff, a lot of people found them in celebrities. I mean, what we would assume their persona would be. If you, I know a lot of the stuff. The most popular thing is if you felt like you could relate to someone, whether maybe not, maybe that is their character, or whatever. But I know that's sometimes what people kind of take their inspiration from.
And do you think, again, I'm asking you to think as almost like an ambassador to your peer group. Do you think that is a healthy approach to finding the best mentors?
Ooh, I don't think it's the most healthiest, but I think if you're in desperation, that is an outlet that you can always go to. I think, honestly, too, I think just organizations, too, that you can relate to or that you show interest in or something, or just your hobbies. If you get lost in it, I mean, I know a huge thing was like some people, if they're going to go work out or if they're going to a yoga class or something, just that community sense builds something. And it's not a specific person, like you're just doing like a yoga sequence, but like that would build something. Or just being in certain activities growing up, that helped a lot. And
Right.
you not necessarily end up being best friends with these people, but just doing something that everyone similarly really likes.
Yeah.
That kind of helps and that kind of inspires you to do better at what you're doing.
Yes.
So I would say that, or to challenge your mind more in a certain sense of way of thinking.
And how would you challenge it?
How would I challenge it? Oh gosh. I would probably, I don't know. I personally, I like to surround myself with people that have the same interests as me in certain fields that I like, but then also I love to counter that and then surround myself with people that are completely not related to that.
Yeah.
Because I like that differentiation, and sometimes it's nice to know someone that doesn't have a knowledge in a certain thing or just is there to support you. I think it's really cute because, like, my mom, for instance, she just completed like a yoga teacher training because she loves yoga.
Yeah.
And her friends, the nicest people, they came and support her. They would come to our house. They don't have any knowledge, not practice that at all.
Yeah.
And so they were inspired, and so they came, and they ended up even if they weren't a huge fan of yoga, just to come and seeing that pushed her farther in her practice.
Yeah.
And made her probably a better teacher.
Yeah.
So I think that is the sense. I think you need to surround yourself, obviously, with people related into what you want to do, but also exactly opposite.
Yeah.
To get that.
I would agree with you. I think that's a very wise approach, and I think inherent in those, excuse me, things that you've just said are several big ideas, and let's touch a little bit on them. One is this idea of growth, that if we challenge ourselves on a regular basis, it could be, let's take a physical analogy for a second. We know that our bodies only get stronger at the point of muscular failure. If we're exercising, there's no point just being entirely sort of within our comfort zone, because actually we'll probably sustain the same degree of fitness. If we actually want to have more stamina or get physically stronger, have more power or more speed or whatever, we know it's pretty straightforward in many respects. We need good nutrition, we need a bit of rest, and then we need to work our muscles to the point where they kind of fail. And I think that's not a completely crazy analogy for, in the broadest sense, spiritual growth. And I think that's what we're very scared in an Anglo-Saxon culture to use that word, because it sounds very touchy-feely. But let's say that what we're talking about is a growth of self, where we feel that we are becoming, we're heading along the right road to make the best of ourselves. I would describe that as a spiritual journey. I'm not talking about a hierarchical mythology where we're going to head for the afterlife. That's a different thing. What I'm talking about is day by day, going to bed and being able to put our head on the pillow and go to sleep quickly and happily, because we're not ashamed of what we did during the course of the day. And to me, that's a spiritual pursuit. If you can go to bed and think, I did okay, I did the best I could do, or close to that, what else can you do? I mean, that's a pretty good way to live. Now, I don't know how many people can listen to this podcast, but if you're listening, ask yourself, do you have that on a weekly basis? 5 days out of 10, half of your life, are you going to bed and do you fall asleep okay? If you've got anxiety issues, where are those coming from? And I think very often what we're lacking are the things that you were just talking about before. One is what we might call our tribe. You talked about your mum and how her mates rallied round. And just look at what your mum was trying to do, apart from anything else. She was trying to be a teacher. She was trying to give back to community. She wasn't pursuing an egotistical job or goal. She was trying to learn a craft, but a craft that was actually allowing her to then give back to other people. And that, in a nutshell, I think, is what many of our great teachers in life have told us, that we only really define who we are for ourselves when we start to help other individuals. Now, that immediately is going to sound quite touchy-feely to a lot of people listening, but put that in the context of your own life.
To continue listening to Steve and Cindy's conversation over value systems and philosophy, please click the next video.